Yeah, as the cloud finally clears, our airports reopen, but the disruption for passengers goes on.
It's been hell. No one tells you anything. It's a nightmare. But we're home.
The questions begin in earnest over the great airspace shutdown, but there is relief for some.
Unpacking at last, home sweet home for the mother and daughter forced to live in an American airport for 4 days.
Also on the programme, the ballot papers take shape as nominations close, how a record number of candidates are chasing your vote.
And drama on the Speedway track, the horrific high-speed crash that almost ended a top rider season before it had begun.
Hello from Victoria and me, and welcome to this evening's programme.
First, it was the day when planes finally reappeared in our skies. The day when passengers started returning home to our airports at last. After the ban on flights was suddenly lifted, the battle to resume normal service after days of disruption began. Today, Luton was running at around 70% of its usual capacity. Stansted managed only 28%, hit by the lack of Ryanair flights. And at Norwich, just 30% of flights were in action. Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing about one family who've made it home after a nightmarish few days. But first, let's get the big picture from Malcolm Robertson, who's at Stansted Airport for us. Malcolm, it's been a real struggle for our airports today. And I gather you've got news of one airline that's playing particularly hardball with the passengers.
Yes, that airline is Ryanair, who are the biggest operator at Stansted and who are due to resume their flying operations tomorrow. Well, tonight, Michael O'Leary, who's the boss of Ryanair, a colourful and often controversial figure in the airline industry, he said that he's prepared to go to court to argue his case that Ryanair shouldn't compensate passengers for hotel bills, restaurant expenses incurred during the week-long stoppage, but that they will reimburse the cost of airline tickets. Now, that stance would appear to be in breach of EU consumer rules. Well, this is a legal dispute, if you like, for another day. Today has been all about passengers being on the move again and the skies being open again. After almost a week, the cloud has lifted to reveal a much brighter outlook for air travellers. At the region's airports, it was something like business as usual again, although it could be days, perhaps even weeks, before normal services resumed. Just under 24 hours ago, British airspace reopened, and out of the night sky, the first plane to land at Stansted for 6 days, captured by ITV Anglia cameras. 2 holiday flights from Lanzarote carrying 370 people touched down at around 11 o'clock last night. A little late, but a bonus for passengers who weren't expecting to land at Stansted, although some admitted to a rather nervous journey.
We didn't want to fly through it today. We would rather have got a cruise line, and that's how unsafe we felt.
No one tells you anything. It's a nightmare. But we're home.
Originally, yes, we were going to Newcastle. About an hour into the flight, then the pilot informed us that he's had clearance to come into Stansted, and everybody cheered.
There are claims passengers are only on the move again because of brinkmanship from British Airways, forcing the authorities to act. Don't expect things to be back to normal yet.
What matters now is that people can get back as quickly as possible in an ordered way and know that they've got the right advice and that they're not going to lose out financially.
At Stansted, they're running at a fraction of normal capacity. Ryanair flights were still grounded. They account for 70% of the airport's traffic. But with the shutdown costing the airline industry £130 million a day, airport officials are just relieved to be back in business.
We have 40 flights going out today, maybe there's a few more this evening depending on some of the other carriers. Normally we have 240, 250 flights a day, so we're roughly 20% at the moment, but that will ramp up over the coming days.
Eva Lundgaard and her daughter Jenna should have flown to Denmark last Saturday, were rebooked for Tuesday, but it'll be Friday before they're able to return home. Camped on the airport floor wasn't quite the holiday they had in mind, and it's been a bit of a struggle filling their time.
Sudoku and playing cards and play on the iPhones and yeah, sleeping and talking and yeah, that's what we can do.
At Luton it was far busier as EasyJet, who are based at the airport, managed to run around 90% of flights. The company said it would carry 140,000 passengers today and was focused on picking up all its customers stranded abroad.
Our first priority is to get as many people home as soon as we can. Once we've done that, I think it will be right to have a proper post-mortem to look back at what decisions were made, what risk assessments were made, were they done quickly enough. I'm sure that there's a lot to be learnt from this episode.
John and Penny Stroud had Norwich Airport to themselves when they arrived at 5 o'clock for their mid-morning flight to Madeira, which eventually took off at 1 o'clock. There was also relief for offshore workers who'd been grounded for a week, with helicopters unable to leave for North Sea gas platforms. And the sight of an Icelandic plane, although this was more a brush with the paint sprayers at Norwich Airport than the victim of volcanic ash. With the weather set fair for the weekend, stand by for air travellers and airports, making up for lost time.
So, Malcolm, what's the situation there over the next few hours?
Well, Ryanair resume their operations at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, although there'll be no flights between the UK and Ireland till Friday. Long-haul flight coming in to Stansted tonight. AirAsia normally run 1 flight a day. Tonight there'll be 2. One is a rescue plane bringing back stranded passengers from the Far East. 600 passengers coming in tonight. And to cope with that, there'll be extra rail services between Stansted and London Liverpool Street. In fact, they're running throughout the night.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, exhausted holidaymakers have been describing their nightmare journeys and relief at reaching home soil.
A mother and daughter from Bedfordshire will be glad to be sleeping in their own beds tonight after spending 4 nights at New York's Newark Airport. Here's Natalie Gray on the travellers home at last.
A shopping trip to New York was what this lucky teenager got from her mum for her 16th birthday. But the dream holiday turned into a nightmare when they found themselves stranded at Newark Airport for 4 nights. No wonder they're thrilled at being back home at Biggleswade in Bedfordshire.
The first night we stayed, well, my mum slept on the floor, I slept on a trolley, and it was freezing cold there.
It's just been really stressful. It's been really hard trying to stay there in that place, in the airport. It's just awful.
They couldn't afford hotels, but after the first night, they were provided with camp beds and food by the Red Cross.
Step back into England was just amazing. Just knew we was on British soil, everything was going to be fine.
The resumption of flights came too late for these foot passengers, arriving on the 8 o'clock ferry in Harwich last night after days of struggling to get home, some from as far away as China.
Absolutely fantastic. Great. I just would like to be home in my own bed now.
Very busy on the ferry and nice to be back home and go back to work and children to school tomorrow.
And good news too for 14 children from Trimley St Martin Primary School near Felixstowe. They should be home tonight after competing in the Lego League World Championships in Atlanta. Now, some of the party could only get as far as Amsterdam, so they've had a tortuous journey being bussed through Belgium and France and then having to get a ferry. Nimala and Supna are putting their passports away. They say they're not going anywhere for a very long time. Natalie Gray, Anglia News.
And who can blame them? Well, we've heard there some of the horrors